Hey guys, welcome to the sixth video of Unit 3, America's Revolution and the Early Republic, where we're looking at the time period of 1754 to 1800. So in this particular video, we're going to be looking at our first kind of really clearly post-Revolutionary War period. We're going to be looking at the first government of the United States, which is actually the Articles of Confederation. And in the AP curriculum framework, this is topic 3.7. So let's jump right into it. All right, so important question here. What was the mindset of colonists as they began to consider what type of government should we establish? So we're going to talk a little bit about state constitutions first. So the colonists, after the Revolutionary Wars, they began to really ponder their state constitution, knew that there were certain things they wanted. They rejected monarchies. They didn't want a single strong ruler. They really wanted to limit government power because they were very concerned over the control that Britain had over them as colonists, and they don't want to see this replicated with state governments. They wanted to emphasize civic and public virtue, the need for people to be involved in the government, and for the people who worked in the government to work for the betterment of the community as a whole rather than just themselves. And they had a real strong fear of tyranny. So these state constitutions were actually not created by the legislatures of the states, but they were actually created by constitutional committees. They were worried that if they were created by state legislatures, the legislatures would write constitutions that really solidified their own power. So they were written by actual separate delegates in constitutional committees to avoid the legislature from creating just a really powerful government that really only served them. So most states had Bill of Rights that outlined certain rights to people that live within that state. Most state constitutions really limited the executive power, the power of the governor, and emphasized more power of the legislature. Voting rights were codified, but mostly only by white property owners. So we weren't quite at the point where it was like all male suffrage. Mostly early state constitutions did maintain property qualifications to be able to vote. And of course, not included in these property qualifications were women, Native Americans, African Americans, were of course not included in this possibility of voting. So, and overall, the state constitutions put the most importance in the legislature. The legislature was the most important branch for them. So we're going to see this reflected at the national level as well when we look at the Articles of Confederation. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So like I said, the national level was the Articles of Confederation, and just like the state levels, they had really weak executive power. As a matter of fact, the Articles of Confederation didn't actually provide for an executive branch. So there was no actual president under the Articles of Confederation. Congress was meant to just coordinate the laws that were passed. The executive branch's job is supposed to be to execute the laws that are passed by the legislature, and somehow the legislature was supposed to do this job as well. Having an executive branch in their mind felt too much like having a king. So the peacetime challenges that the Articles of Confederation are really going to face after the war is over are these. They had to figure out, the government had to figure out how to demobilize the army and pay them, because not all of the soldiers had been paid. Many of them had back pay owed to them. They were in an incredible amount of national debt. They had borrowed to be able to fight the war. So they had to figure out how they were going to deal with that. They had to figure out how to regulate foreign commerce. And this was a challenge for the Articles of Confederation because the national government really didn't have that power. It was up to each state how to manage foreign commerce. Because remember, this was a big thing with the colonists, was Britain telling them how to manage commerce, and the navigation laws that felt increasingly stifling to the colonists. So they were really worried about a national government managing that for them. Also, another challenge was that every state was printing their own currency. So it wasn't like there was one American currency. As you moved through the United States in those early years, there were a whole bunch of different currencies, different types of money, and one state might not take another state's currency. They might not place value on it. And also, they had a problem with Britain. Even though they'd managed to get really favorable terms from Britain. Remember, I mentioned in my last video that the radical Whigs had kind of given in and actually given the states this huge Northwest territory that the states hadn't even occupied or controlled at any point. They couldn't actually convince the British to leave that area. So even though it was technically theirs, they didn't have a good way to convince the British to leave those military forts, short of going to war again, which no one wanted to do. Okay, so there were more weaknesses of the articles than strengths, but there were some strengths too. So consider that this was the government that saw the Revolutionary War through. I mean, to be fair, it took them a few years to actually ratify the Articles of Confederation. So it wasn't actually ratified until, I want to say, 1781. So it did take them a couple of years, but it did see through the end of the Revolutionary War. It gave them a framework for government. It also managed to give the ex-colonists a form of national citizenship, like who is a citizen. Many of the colonists had not been born in the United States, so were they citizens or not? And they were, according to the Articles of Confederation. It also got states to cede their western land claims. Okay, so a lot of former colonies had land claims off to the west, that they had claimed as Britain gave up those lands after the Revolutionary War as Britain left. And a lot of colonies had claimed these lands as part of theirs. And the government was successfully, under the Articles of Confederation, able to convince the new states, you need to give up this land, up this territory, so we don't end up in a civil war with these conflicting claims to the Northwest Territory. This is the Northwest Territory here on the right. And you can see that's sort of the Great Lakes area. So this is the territory, the Ohio River Valley. This is what was ceded to the colonies by Britain, even though the colonists really mostly did not occupy this area yet. And a lot of places tried to claim it, and they were able to successfully convince those states to give up those claims rather than have states fighting, possibly civil war, over trying to claim this territory. So this is where the Northwest Ordinance comes in. This is absolutely the greatest success of the Articles of Confederation. The Northwest Ordinance eliminated the problems of colonies. Basically, it said, listen, the United States is probably going to grow. It was sort of inevitable. The U.S. would want to continue to expand. And some people said, well, should we create colonies? Should the United States have colonies? And it's only the original states that are going to be states. And the Northwest Ordinance said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to create colonies ourselves. Our new territories that we expand into can become equal states. So it provided a pathway for statehood, for new territories that were opened up, either sold to or conquered by the new United States. It also specifically created resources to establish a public school system, which is pretty important. And also, according to the Northwest Ordinance, slavery was not allowed in the new Northwest Territory. So it created several free states as well. Okay, so those are some of the strengths of the Articles. Let's take a look at some of the weaknesses, because there were some really glaring weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So first of all, the Articles of Confederation was a very weak republic compared to European countries. Their federal government actually didn't have the power to tax people. That was the big issue that caused the war. So they said, no, our federal government can't tax people. If they want money, they have to ask the states for it. So this is a real problem, because you can imagine how well it's going to go if the federal government comes with their hat in hand to say, oh, states, can we please have some money? Probably most of the states are going to say no. So they had no way to discharge the national debts they had gained during the war, and they had no way to actually aid states in the time of crisis. They had no way to fund a military, so they couldn't actually help if any of the states were threatened, as we will see in a minute. Also, they had no ability to force Britain out of the Northwest Territory because they had no money to pay for an army. So they had that issue as well. Also, at the national level of government, basically what we see here is a confederation. We see this loose organization of states instead of a powerful federal government. They were very concerned, like the states and the state constitutions, they were very concerned about creating a strong central government. They didn't want it to be like Britain. They didn't want it to be a monarchy. So they made this very weak central government. The Congress wasn't allowed to stop states from raising taxes on imports, while others lowered them to draw in customers. So like they couldn't regulate trade. Okay, they couldn't stop the states from printing money to pay debts, which led to huge inflation because of worthless paper money. So they really had very little control over what the states were doing. So our two big problems then become huge issues with paper currency, massive inflation, and national debt that they had no way to discharge. And then we start to see emerging arguments over political equality and the limits of republicanism. We start to see a shift back to some conservatism. Remember, the men who started this government, they were elites for the most part. They were planters, they were wealthy merchants. They were a little concerned that the equality portion, the equality movement of the revolution had gone too far, and that they very firmly, the better sort should be ruling them. And yes, that includes Mr. Alexander Hamilton's everybody's hero of the revolution. So they were very concerned about giving too much power to the people. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, this sort of leveling state constitution that allowed a lot of power by common people is replaced with a document that really centralizes more power. So increasingly, you see more concern with having a stronger government and less concern with making sure commoners had a voice. They really wanted the better sort to be, quote unquote, better sort to be ruling. Okay, so that takes us to Shays' Rebellion. Okay, so because of debt from the war, states raised taxes in order to pay for that debt, because many of the states were in debt as well. And this really made poor farmers in Massachusetts poor farmers everywhere, very angry. In Massachusetts, this really comes to a head when this farmer, Daniel Shays, leads a rebellion in 1786. He basically used force to keep debtors out of prison, and he went to seize weapons to try to force the legislature to change the laws to get rid of the taxes. Look, guys, this is a second revolution in the making. This was a big deal. Had he not been stopped, who knows what would have happened? I mean, the new United States, which was so fragile still, could have been ripped apart by competing factions. So this is a real issue. So Massachusetts, of course, turns to the national government and says, you need to help us. But the national legislature was absolutely powerless because, as I said before, they had no federal army. They had no federal money to pay for an army. So they were not actually able to help. What actually ended up happening was a group of Boston merchants put their money together. They raised money to pay a militia in order to put down the rebellion. And this is why the Shays' Rebellion is really, really important, because it revealed the weaknesses of the article. It really showed that the national government didn't have the power to fund and establish an army which could allow civil war, essentially, that could ultimately rip apart the new republic. So after Shays' Rebellion, there is this increasing sense that something has to change. A new government has to be had. So that's going to take us into the next topic, which we're going to talk a little bit about the development of the Constitution and the ratification of the Constitution.